"You're not on my level anymore," she said during dinner in front of her friends. I smiled, paid the bill, and left quietly. Months later, she ran into me at an event where I was being introduced as the guest speaker. "You're not on my level anymore." She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather, like she was asking for more bread. But it landed like a punch, not the kind that knocks you out, but the kind that makes your ears ring for 3 days straight. I looked at her across the table. Candles lit, wine poured, her 3 new friends sitting around us with that particular brand of polite curiosity that barely disguises amusement. I looked at her, and I smiled. Not the smile of a man who didn't hear her. The smile of a man who heard every single syllable. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my card, and set it face down on the edge of the table without a word. She laughed, that nervous, high-pitched laugh she used when she wasn't sure if she'd gone too far. She touched my arm. "I'm just being honest," she said. I nodded once. Slowly, the waiter came. I signed the receipt, slid the card back into my pocket, folded the napkin neatly on the table, and stood up. "Have a good night," I said to all of them. And I walked out. What none of them knew, what she didn't know, was that I had already made a decision long before I stood up from that chair. And what none of them could have predicted was what would happen 7 months later, in a hotel ballroom exactly 3 blocks from that same restaurant. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part that came before it. And the part that came before it is the part that still keeps me awake some nights, not out of regret, but out of something closer to disbelief. The kind of disbelief that only arrives when you realize you spent years handing your loyalty to someone who was quietly keeping score in a ledger you weren't allowed to see. At that point, I had been with Claire for almost 3 years. 3 years of late-night conversations that stretched past 2 in the morning. 3 years of grocery runs and bad movies and inside jokes that lived in the space between us like furniture. 3 years of planning. Planning trips we'd take. Planning the kind of life we both said we wanted. Planning a future that, looking back now, only one of us actually believed in. I was 29. She was 27. We'd met at a rooftop gathering in the summer, the kind of night that feels too clean, too golden to actually be the beginning of something real. But it was real. For a while. The first 2 years were good. Not perfect. Nobody's first 2 years are perfect. But they were honest, and honest matters more than perfect in the long run. I was working a stable job at a mid-sized tech company. Technical writing, content architecture, the kind of work that pays the bills without generating envy at dinner parties. She was working in marketing at a startup, and she was good at it. Sharp instincts. Fast talker. Could read a room in 30 seconds flat. We worked together in that quiet, unspoken way that couples develop. She handled the social energy, I handled the depth. We balanced each other. Or at least, we used to. The shift started, I can identify it now with almost surgical precision, around the time she got recruited by a larger firm. A bigger salary. A corner office in a glass building downtown. New colleagues who wore watches that cost more than my monthly rent. I was genuinely proud of her. I told her that, and I meant it. But I noticed, within weeks, not months, that something in how she carried herself had changed. Not her confidence. She'd always had that. Something else. Something quieter and more dangerous. She started comparing. Not out loud, not at first, but in small ways. The way she'd pause when I described my work, like she was doing a mental calculation. The way she'd mention her colleagues' salaries with just enough casualness to make sure I registered the numbers. The way she'd look around at dinner and say things like, "I think we need to upgrade this place," gesturing at the apartment we'd both loved for over a year. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself she was adjusting to a new environment, absorbing new pressures, trying to find her footing. I believed that. For longer than I should have. The new friends came with the new job. Her name was Brooke, Claire's work friend who wore designer everything and spoke about people's net worth the way sports fans talk about stats. Then there was Owen, Brooke's boyfriend, who had the kind of casual arrogance that only money and mediocrity combined can produce. And then Cassidy, who I later found out had very casually told Claire, at a wine bar, 3 months into their friendship, that she didn't understand why Claire was with someone who wasn't playing in the same league. I didn't find that out until much later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The dinners started changing. Once, our dinners had been about us, something easy, something we could talk through without performing. Now they were events, carefully chosen restaurants, topics calibrated for the table. I'd sit across from Claire and feel the distance between us measured not in feet, but in something invisible and widening. She'd laugh differently around them, more curated, more aware of how she sounded. And I started to feel, not insecure, exactly, but like someone who had been invited to a party they weren't actually supposed to be at. I mentioned it once. Just once. You seemed different around them, I said on the drive home one night. She looked at me in that way she'd started developing, patient, but barely. I'm growing, she said. That's what growth looks like. I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I had something I was protecting, something I hadn't told her about yet, something I'd been building quietly, in the margins of my life, for almost 18 months. Here's the part one need to explain, because it matters. For most of our relationship, my job was fine. Steady. Decent money. But it was never the whole story. Outside of work, I had been writing. Not casually. Seriously. I had been working on a framework, a methodology for communication strategy in high-stakes corporate environments that I'd been developing through research, through trial and error, through dozens of conversations with professionals across industries. I'd been speaking at small events, local business groups, industry meetups. Nothing that would have impressed anyone at Claire's new dinner table. But it was growing. Month by month, quietly, it was growing. I hadn't told Claire the full scope of it. Partly because I didn't want to oversell something that hadn't become what I believed it could. Partly because I wanted to show her, not tell her. And partly, if I'm honest, because somewhere along the way, I'd started to sense that she wouldn't receive it the way I needed her to. So I kept building, quietly, while she recalibrated who she was and what she wanted. The dinner happened on a Thursday. Claire had organized it. She told me it was casual. Just dinner with Brooke, Owen, and Cassidy. A new place downtown that Brooke had suggested. I wore a jacket and dark jeans. Claire was in a dress I hadn't seen before. Sleek, expensive, a silent announcement. We arrived together but separated almost immediately, her slipping into easy conversation with them while I settled in across the table. The dinner was fine at first. Wine, appetizers, the predictable loops of conversation about travel, about the market, about mutual acquaintances whose salaries kept entering the discussion like uninvited guests. I held my own. I wasn't quiet. I wasn't awkward. I made them laugh twice in the first 40 minutes. Owen told a long story about a deal he'd closed and glanced at me like he was expecting something. Admiration, maybe, or acknowledgement of a world I wasn't part of. I nodded, said, "That's a clean play," and moved on. But I could feel something building at the table. A kind of low-pressure system. The way a room feels before a storm settles in. It happened between the main course and dessert. Brooke had been talking about a conference she'd attended. Something about leadership and innovation. The kind of event that sounds impressive until you realize everyone at it is there to be seen rather than to learn. She mentioned the speaker. Completely next level, she said. You know the type. Walks in and the whole room just shifts. Claire nodded enthusiastically. Then, I don't know if it was planned or impulsive, and I've never decided which would be worse. She looked at me, and she said it. You're not on my level anymore. Calm. Even. Like a statement of fact. Like something long considered and finally released. The table went very quiet. Brooke looked at her wine glass. Owen studied the bread basket. Cassidy, bless her honesty, looked directly at me with something that might have been pity or might have been fascination. I looked at Claire. She held my gaze. Her chin tilted up just slightly, the way it did when she decided she was right about something and was waiting for the world to confirm it. I didn't say anything. Not because I couldn't. I had things I could have said. I had information she wasn't aware of. I had evidence that would have changed the entire texture of that moment. But I didn't use it. Not there. Not like that. Because what she had just done, in front of these people, at this table, without warning, told me something that no argument, no defense, and no revelation could fix. She wasn't wrong because she had the facts wrong. She was wrong because of what she believed she was allowed to do. And that, I understood in the silence of that moment, was not something I could talk her out of. I smiled, reached for my card, set it on the table, waited for the bill. She laughed, that nervous laugh. I'm just being honest, she said again. I know, I said, and I meant it. I signed a receipt, folded the napkin, stood up, said goodnight to everyone, and walked out into the cold air without looking back. She texted me 4 times before I reached my car. The first one was, "That was rude." The second was, "You're being dramatic." The third was a question mark. The fourth, and this one I remember word for word, was, "You could have just talked to me. Why do you always walk away instead of communicating?" I put my phone in my coat pocket, drove home, sat at my desk for a long time in the quiet. Not angry, not devastated, something more like resolved. I called her the next morning. It was a short conversation. She apologized, or offered the version of an apology that doesn't fully admit to the wrong. I shouldn't have said that there, she said. Not, I shouldn't have said that. There. The location was the problem, apparently, not the sentiment. I listened. When she was done, I said, Claire, I think we've been moving in different directions for a while. She went quiet. Are you breaking up with me? She asked. I think we both know we've been heading here for months, I said. I just don't think either of us wanted to say it first. Another silence. Then she said, so that's it? Just like that? Not just like that, I said. Like 3 years and a long, slow goodbye that we both pretended not to notice. She hung up. I sat with the silence. And then I opened my laptop and went back to work. The weeks after were strange in the way that post-breakup weeks always are. Not unbearable, not dramatic, just textured, full of small moments that remind you of how much shared life you'd accumulated without realizing it. The brand of coffee she'd insisted on that was still in my cabinet. The playlist we'd made together that auto-populated on a Sunday morning. The habit I had of turning to say something funny and finding empty air. I let myself feel all of it. I didn't rush through it, but I also didn't stop working. Because here's the thing about having something you're building in secret. When everything else falls away, the work becomes the thing you hold on to. Not as a distraction, as a direction. I had a meeting scheduled 3 weeks after the breakup with a professional speaking bureau that had reached out based on a session I'd run at a regional business summit the previous spring. I hadn't told Claire about that summit, either. I'd said I was at a conference for work. Technically true, just not the full picture. The bureau wanted to represent me for a speaker roster they were building. Corporate events, industry conferences, leadership summits. The kind of rooms where, ironically, Brooke and Owen would have been comfortable. I took the meeting. It went well. Better than well. They offered a 6-month trial contract, and by the end of that trial, I had 3 bookings, paid, high profile, and was being asked to submit a proposal for a keynote at a national leadership conference. The thing I had been building in the margins of my life was no longer marginal. It had become the main thing. I won't pretend the irony was lost on me. The conference, the National Leadership Conference that would become the largest stage I'd stood on, was organized by a consortium of corporate firms, the kind of firms whose people attended dinners like the one that ended everything. The venue was a downtown hotel. Ballroom capacity, for 100. My slot was opening keynote. I'm not telling you this to show off. I'm telling you this so you understand what happened when she walked into that ballroom. 7 months. That's how long it had been. 7 months since the dinner. 7 months since the bill. 7 months since the cold air outside the restaurant, and the 4 texts, and the short phone call, and the silence. In 7 months, I had signed with the Bureau, delivered 3 conference sessions across 2 states, finished the methodology framework I'd been building for nearly 2 years, and submitted a book proposal that was, by the morning of the conference, under serious consideration by 2 publishing houses. I had also, and this I mention not because it's relevant to her, but because it's relevant to me, slept better than I had in the last year of that relationship, worked with more clarity, laughed more easily, felt more like myself than I had in longer than I wanted to admit. The morning of the conference, I arrived early. I always do. I walked the room while it was still empty. 400 chairs, all facing a stage with a single spotlight. The kind of room that, 5 years ago, would have made my hands cold. Now it just felt like the next thing. I did a sound check. Met the event coordinator, a sharp, organized woman named Paige who had run events like this for 12 years and ran this one like a general. You're our opener, she said, reviewing the schedule on her tablet. The audience will be a mix, C-suite, mid-level leadership, some founders. High expectations. Fast to judge. I told her that was fine. She looked at me for a moment. You're very calm, she said. I've been calm for 7 months, I said. She laughed, confused but unbothered. The room, filled by 9:15. I was in the back corridor, going over my notes, doing the quiet internal preparation that precedes any performance. Not nerves, exactly, more like tuning. The way a musician adjusts before a set. Paige came and found me at 9:25. 5 minutes, she said. You good? I'm good, I said. And I meant it. I need to stop here and tell you something I haven't told you yet. In the 2 weeks before the conference, Cassidy had reached out to me. Cassidy, the one from the dinner. The one who had watched me stand up and leave with that look that was somewhere between pity and fascination. She found me through a professional networking platform. The message was brief. Hey, I don't know if you remember me. We met at dinner with Claire a while back. I'm not in touch with her anymore. Long story. I just wanted to say that what she said that night was completely out of line. I wanted to say something in the moment, and I didn't, and I've felt weird about it since. Anyway, hope you're well. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. 2 sentences. I appreciate you saying that. I'm doing well. That was the full extent of it. But the message had told me something. Cassidy had removed herself from that orbit, which meant the ground Claire had been standing on was shifting whether she admitted it or not. I didn't think about it much after that, but I thought about it the morning of the conference when I was standing in that back corridor. The introduction was being handled by the conference director, a man named Ford who had the deliberate, unhurried authority of someone used to rooms like this. I could hear him at the podium through the door, a communicator and strategist whose work has been applied in boardrooms, restructuring scenarios, and high-pressure leadership environments across multiple industries. I took a breath. The author of a framework that has been described by senior executives as, and I'm quoting directly here, the clearest thinking on persuasion and trust building in the modern corporate environment. Another breath. Please welcome our opening keynote speaker. He said my name. The room responded, and I walked through the door. The stage felt like the most natural place I'd ever stood. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the kind of thing you say in a memoir when you want the reader to feel a swell of music. But it's just true. The room was full and alert and watching, and I opened my mouth and spoke, and the words came with the ease of something practiced until it doesn't feel like practice anymore. The session was 45 minutes. It was good. I knew it was good not from applause. Applause can be polite, but from the quality of the silence. The way 400 people leaned slightly forward and stopped shifting in their seats. That silence is real. That silence is something you earn. The applause at the end was long. Longer than I'd expected. Ford came back to the podium, shook my hand, said something into the microphone about a 10-minute break before the next panel. And the room started to breathe again. Conversations broke out. People stood up. Some walked toward the refreshment tables along the side wall. I stepped down from the stage and was immediately met by a small cluster of attendees wanting to ask follow-up questions. The standard post-keynote ritual. I stayed with them. A founder from the Pacific Northwest who wanted to discuss applying the framework to his team. A woman who ran communications for a healthcare company and had 3 very specific questions about trust building across hierarchical structures. An older man who said only, "That was the best use of 45 minutes I've had in 2 years," and shook my hand before walking away. I was in the middle of answering the healthcare communicator's 3rd question when I felt something shift in my peripheral vision. A kind of stillness. The way a room changes when someone enters it who isn't sure they're supposed to be there. I finished my sentence. Then I looked up. She was standing 15 feet away. Claire, in a blazer and tailored trousers, a conference lanyard around her neck. She had a coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other, and she was completely, absolutely still. Like someone who had walked around a corner expecting one thing and found an entirely different world instead. Our eyes met. I held her gaze for exactly as long as it took me to decide that I wasn't going to be the one to look away first. Her expression did something complicated. I don't have a clean word for it. It wasn't guilt exactly. It wasn't embarrassment exactly. It was something more layered than both of those. Something that looked like a person rapidly recalibrating every assumption they'd made and finding that none of them held. The healthcare communicator was still talking. I refocused, answered her question. She thanked me and moved off toward the refreshment table. I stood there with the small remaining space around me. And Claire, slowly, like someone who wasn't entirely sure their legs were working, walked toward me. "Hey," she said. One word. And already it was different from any hey I'd heard from her in the last year of our relationship. There was no performance in it. No calibration. It was just the word itself, stripped to its skeleton. "Hey," I said back. She glanced at the stage. At the screen still displaying a slide from my presentation. At the program guide in her hand, which, I could see from where I stood, had my name and photo on the speaker page. She looked back at me. "You were." She started. Stopped. Started again. "That was you." "That was me," I said. Another silence. A different kind this time from the one in the restaurant. That silence had been charged with what she thought she knew about me. This one was full of everything she was realizing she didn't. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," I said. "How long have you?" She gestured vaguely, at the stage, at the room, at whatever she was trying to name. A while, I said. She nodded, looked at her coffee cup, looked back up. You look good, she said. And I think she meant it in multiple senses. Thank you, I said. So do you. A pause. I'm sorry, she said. The words came quickly, like she'd been holding them and had decided, standing in this ballroom, with my name on the speaker board behind her, to finally let them go. For that dinner. What I said. I looked at her for a moment. Long enough to be honest. I know, I said. I believe you. She waited. Like she was expecting more. Like she was expecting me to say it was okay, or that it didn't matter, or that we could find our way back to something. I didn't say any of those things. Take care of yourself, Claire, I said. Warm. Genuine. Final. She nodded once. Her eyes did something they hadn't done in the last 2 years of our relationship. They softened. Not into sadness. Into something more honest than sadness. Into recognition. She turned and walked back toward the main seating area. I watched her go, and then I turned back to the room, because there were still people to talk to and conversations worth having, and my time, as it tends to do when you stop wasting it on the wrong things, was no longer something I had in surplus. Later that afternoon, Ford found me near the registration desk. Great feedback from the morning, he said. The event sponsors want to talk about having you back for the spring summit. I'd like that, I said. He handed me a card. We'll be in touch next week. I put the card in my jacket pocket, the same jacket I'd worn to that dinner 7 months earlier, the same pocket that had held the card I'd set on that table in that restaurant. I thought about that for a half second. The geometry of it. Same pocket, different table, different kind of card entirely. I've had a lot of time since then to think about what that dinner was, and what it meant, and what, if anything, I would change about how I handled it. And I keep arriving at the same place. She didn't say something that destroyed me. She said something that clarified. There's a difference. You're not on my level anymore is a devastating sentence if you believe the person saying it has accurate information about your level. If they don't, if their entire assessment is based on an outdated or incomplete picture, then it's not a verdict. It's just a gap in their knowledge. And gaps in knowledge aren't insults. They're just the distance between what someone sees and what's actually true. The problem was never that she said it. The problem was the belief underneath it. The belief that she had the right to rank me. That our relationship was a hierarchy with a clear top and a clear bottom. That growth was a competition she had entered without telling me the rules. I wasn't interested in competing. I was interested in building. And I learned, the hard way, that those two things don't mix. There's something else I want to tell you. Something I've only told a couple of people in my life. In the months after the breakup, during the period where I was working hardest and sleeping best and feeling most like myself, I spent a lot of time asking a question that's uncomfortable but necessary. The question was, what did I allow? Not what did she do? What did I allow? Because the dinner was a shock, but the dinner didn't come out of nowhere. There had been signs. The long dinner silences. The half sentences when she introduced me. The comments about the apartment, the car, the job. The tired patience when I talked about my work. I had noticed all of it. And I had made a choice, each time, to let it pass. Partly because I believed in the relationship. Partly because I was giving her time to adjust. But partly, and this is the uncomfortable part, because I didn't want the conflict. I wanted peace more than I wanted honesty. And when you do that long enough, the other person starts to believe that the peace is an accurate representation of how things are. They don't know you're swallowing things. They just see the surface. And the surface looked, to Claire, like a man who was comfortable being less than. So she concluded he was. I'm not saying it excused what she said. It didn't. But I understand now how we both got to that table. And understanding it changed the way I move through every room I walk into now. I say more of what I mean. I let people see more of what I'm building before it's finished. Not because I need approval, but because the silence, the protective, pride-laced silence, had cost me more than the vulnerability of just showing my work ever would have. The book deal came through 6 weeks after the conference. One of the 2 publishing houses made an offer. It was a real offer. Real enough to make me sit very still for about 30 seconds before I called my agent and said yes. The book won't come out for another 8 months. But it's being written. And when it is, when it's sitting on a shelf or on a screen or in the hands of someone trying to figure out how to communicate better in a world that rewards the loudest voice over the clearest one, I'll think about the dinner. Not with bitterness. With something that's almost gratitude. Almost. Because that dinner, that specific, terrible, illuminating dinner, was the last moment I spent being small so someone else could feel tall. A few weeks after the conference, I ran into Owen. Not Claire. Owen. He was alone, at a coffee shop, working on something on his laptop. He looked up when I walked in, recognized me. His face did something, a calculation, a reassessment, and then he nodded. "Hey man," he said. "Hey," I said. "You were at that leadership thing downtown, weren't you?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "Were you presenting?" "Opening keynote," I said. He nodded again. Slowly. "That's impressive," he said. And the thing about Owen was, in that moment, without Brooke beside him, without the performance of the dinner table, he actually sounded like he meant it. I ordered my coffee. When it came, I turned and said, "Take care." "You too, man," he said. And I walked out. I still think about who I was in those last several months with Claire. Not who I was before. The early version, the honest version, the version that showed up to that rooftop gathering with no idea what the next 3 years would look like. That version of me is fine. I think about who I was in the slow erosion. The version that saw the tide going out and told himself it would come back in. That version was loyal. And loyalty is a quality I still believe in. But loyalty without boundaries isn't loyalty. It's just an open invitation for someone to take more than you'd consciously offered. I have more limits now. Not walls. Limits. There's a difference. Walls keep everything out. Limits let the right things in. I know where mine are. And I know, with a clarity that I didn't have 3 years ago, that I will not sit at another table and let someone rank me. Not because I'm too proud to be ranked. Because I'm too clear about my own worth to need the external verdict to tell me what I am. The last time I heard about Claire was through a professional connection, not through friends, not through Cassidy. Just a name in a conversation. She'd left the firm, moved to a different city, started something of her own. I wish her well. I mean that. I wish her the kind of clarity that can only come from real reflection. The kind that doesn't arrive from new clothes or new friends or new titles. The kind that arrives in the quiet, when the performance falls away and you have to look at who you actually are and decide if that person is someone you can respect. I hope she finds it. I genuinely do. But that's her work to do. Not mine. Mine was done. 7 months. That's all it took. Not to prove her wrong. I wasn't interested in proving anything. Just to finish becoming what I had already been in the process of becoming. The dinner didn't accelerate it. It just removed the last thing that had been quietly drawing my attention away from it. 400 chairs in a ballroom. A stage with a single spotlight. A program guide with my name and photo. And Claire standing 15 feet away, holding a coffee cup, recalibrating everything she thought she knew. That was the moment. Not the dramatic one. The quiet one. The one where I said, "Take care of yourself, Claire," and meant it without needing anything from it. That was the moment I knew the chapter was fully closed. Not because of what she had lost. Because of what I had built. I think about something Ford said to me backstage, about 30 minutes before I went on. He'd been doing this, running leadership conferences, booking keynote speakers, for over a decade. He'd seen a lot of people walk out onto stages. He'd seen a lot of them fall short. The ones who do it well, he said, not looking up from his tablet, almost always have something they had to get past first. Not failure exactly. More like someone else's low ceiling. I looked at him. He looked up. "You know what I mean?" he asked. I said, "Yeah." And he nodded once, like we'd settled something, and went back to his tablet. I stood in that corridor and thought about the dinner. About the card on the table. About the cold air outside. About the quiet drive home. About 18 months of building something in the margins of my life, while someone sat across from me at the same dinner table and decided I wasn't worth watching. Someone else's low ceiling. Yeah, I knew what he meant. The spotlight on that stage was warm. That's the thing nobody tells you about standing in a spotlight when you've earned the right to be there. People think it's exposing. Harsh. Like being caught. It's not. When it's right, when you've done the work, when you've built the thing, when you've survived your own erosion and come out with more clarity than you started with, the light doesn't feel like exposure. It feels like recognition. The quiet, patient kind. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself loudly because it's been real the entire time. I stood in it, said what I had to say, and then I walked back off the stage, back into the ordinary world of coffee and conference badges and corridors. And somewhere in that ordinary world, a woman I had once loved stood holding a program guide with my name in it, recalculating everything she had been so certain about. I didn't need her to recalculate, but I won't lie to you. It didn't hurt to watch it happen. Here's what I'll leave you with. Not advice, not a lesson, just the thing that stays with me, the line that replays when I'm standing in a new room, before a new audience, in front of a new opportunity. She said I wasn't on her level anymore. And she was right, just not in the direction she thought.